They say the squeaky wheel gets the grease, but in my family, I learned that the quiet wheel gets replaced without anyone noticing it was ever there. My name is Margaret, and at 51, I finally understood that being the dependable daughter, the one who never asks for help, never complains, never needs anything, doesn't make you indispensable. It makes you invisible. This is the story of how I discovered that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop doing everything and let the people who took you for granted finally see what they've lost. The realization began on a Tuesday morning in October when my sister Caroline called me from her car, her voice breathless with the kind of manufactured urgency that had become her signature. "Maggie, thank God you answered. I'm having a crisis." She always had a crisis. The caterer for Mom's birthday party just canceled, and I have 40 people coming on Saturday. You know how Mom gets about disappointing people. Can you handle the food? You're so good at that stuff. I stood in my kitchen, still in my robe, holding my first cup of coffee and watching the morning light filter through the curtains of the house I'd bought with my own money, furnished with my own choices, and maintained with my own hands. At 51, I was a successful marketing consultant who had built a thriving practice, owned property in 3 states, and managed an investment portfolio that would have impressed my late father. But to my family, I was still just the helpful daughter who was so good at that stuff. If you've ever been the one everyone calls when they need something fixed, planned, or paid for, but somehow never makes the guest list for the celebration afterward, you're not alone. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of women who are tired of being taken for granted, because your worth isn't measured by your usefulness to others. "Caroline," I said slowly, "Mom's party is in 4 days. 40 people? That's not handling the food, that's catering a major event." I know, but you always make it work. Remember her 70th? That beautiful spread you did? Everyone's still talking about it. I remembered her 70th. I'd spent 3 days cooking, 2 days decorating, and $800 of my own money on ingredients and flowers. Caroline had shown up 20 minutes late in a new dress, accepted compliments on the wonderful party she'd organized, and left early to meet friends for drinks. I'd stayed until midnight, cleaning up. "What were you planning to pay the caterer?" I asked. "Well, that's the thing. Since you're family, I thought. You thought I'd do it for free." A pause. "Maggie, you know money's tight right now. James is between jobs and with the kids' activities." Caroline's husband James had been between jobs for 6 months, preferring to pursue his passion for photography while Caroline's teacher's salary barely covered their mortgage. "I'll think about it," I said, which in our family was code for, "Yes, but I want you to think I'm doing you a favor." But this time, I found myself actually thinking about it. Really thinking. I thought about the pattern that had defined my adult life. Caroline creating chaos, me cleaning it up. Caroline was making promises she couldn't keep, me keeping them for her. Caroline was the fun, spontaneous sister, while I was the responsible, reliable one who handled the details nobody else wanted to handle. I thought about Mom's last birthday, and the one before that, and the decade of birthdays, holidays, and family gatherings where I'd worked behind the scenes while Caroline basked in the spotlight. I thought about the family narrative that had calcified over the years. Caroline was the creative one, the free spirit who needed support and understanding. I was the practical one, the one who had it all figured out, who didn't need help or attention or acknowledgement. The problem was, I'd helped write that narrative. Every time I said yes without hesitation, every time I solved problems without being asked, every time I absorbed the costs, financial and emotional, of other people's poor planning, I reinforced the story that I was fine, that I could handle anything, that I didn't need what everyone else needed. By Thursday, I'd made my decision. I called Caroline back. "I can't cater Mom's party." "What do you mean you can't?" "I mean I can't. I have other commitments." I didn't, but that wasn't the point. "But Maggie, you promised." I said I'd think about it. I thought about it. The answer is no. The silence on the other end stretched long enough for me to wonder if the call had dropped. "Then, I don't understand. You never say no." "I'm saying no now." "What am I supposed to do?" "Mom will be devastated if we have to cancel." "You'll figure it out. You're creative." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling something I hadn't experienced in years, the strange lightness of not being responsible for someone else's emergency. It was unsettling and liberating in equal measure. Caroline called back an hour later. Then again, that evening. Then she enlisted Mom, who called with her particular brand of gentle manipulation disguised as concern. "Margaret, dear, Caroline tells me you're not feeling well enough to help with the party." Caroline had lied, of course. "I'm feeling fine, Mom. I just can't take on a catering job with 4 days' notice." "Oh, I'm sure it wouldn't be that much work. You're so organized. It would be a lot of work." That's why Caroline was going to pay a professional caterer. Well, yes, but family is different. We help each other. I looked out my window at the garden I'd planted and maintained myself, the fence I'd had installed, the life I'd built through my own efforts. "Do we, Mom? Do we help each other?" "What do you mean? When was the last time Caroline helped me with something? When was the last time anyone in this family asked what I needed?" "You never need anything, dear. You're so capable." And there it was. The assumption that had shaped 5 decades of family dynamics. I was so capable that I didn't need support, acknowledgement, or consideration. I was so strong that I could absorb everyone else's chaos without it affecting me. I was so reliable that my own needs were invisible. "I need to go, Mom. I'll talk to you later." I didn't go to Mom's birthday party. For the first time in my adult life, I missed a family gathering, and the world didn't end. Caroline managed to pull together a simple celebration at Mom's house: store-bought cake, deli sandwiches, paper plates. According to my Aunt Linda, who called to check on me, it was perfectly lovely and Mom had a wonderful time. The family narrative shifted slightly. Caroline had been so resourceful under pressure, so creative in making do with simple elements. No one mentioned that the only reason Caroline had been under pressure was that she'd failed to plan ahead. No one noted that store-bought food and paper plates were exactly what I'd been trying to save them from when I'd devoted years of my life to creating memorable celebrations. But I noticed something else in Aunt Linda's report. The party had been smaller. Several family friends hadn't come because they'd been told the party was postponed due to circumstances. The truth was that Caroline had been too embarrassed to invite people to a makeshift celebration, so she'd quietly uninvited them rather than admit she'd mismanaged the planning. The Margaret who had spent decades smoothing over family disasters would have felt guilty. The Margaret who was learning to see clearly felt something else, vindicated. 3 weeks later, Caroline called with another crisis. "Maggie, I hate to ask, but we're having a cash flow problem. James has a big photography contract coming through, but we need to cover the mortgage this month. Could you spot us $3,000? Just until the contract pays out." I was quiet for so long that Caroline said, "Hello? Are you there?" "I'm here. I'm just thinking about the last time you asked me for money." "What about it?" "You never paid it back." Another silence. That was different. That was for Emma's dental work. Emma was Caroline's 15-year-old daughter, my niece, whom I adored. The dental work had been necessary, and I'd been happy to help. But the $2,500 I'd lent Caroline 18 months ago had never been repaid, and after a few awkward conversations, we'd all silently agreed to pretend it had been a gift. "How was it different?" I asked. "It was a medical emergency, and this is a mortgage emergency. And before that was a car emergency. And before that was a Christmas emergency." I was amazed by the steadiness of my own voice. "Caroline, in the last 5 years, you've asked me for money 7 times. You've paid me back exactly once. I didn't realize you were keeping track." I wasn't. But when you ask for the 8th time, it's hard not to notice the pattern. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying no. We could lose the house, Maggie. Then you need to have a conversation with James about getting a job that pays regularly instead of chasing photography dreams that don't cover your expenses." The call ended badly. Caroline hung up after accusing me of being cold and not the person she thought I was. She was right. I wasn't the person she thought I was. I was discovering that the person she thought I was, the endlessly giving, never needing, always available sister, had been a character I'd been playing for so long I'd forgotten it was a role. The real Margaret, the one who was emerging from decades of self-imposed servitude, had needs, boundaries, and a limited tolerance for other people's manufactured emergencies. 2 months later, the family gathered for Thanksgiving at my cousin Beth's house. I arrived with a single side dish, roasted vegetables, instead of the elaborate spread I usually contributed. Caroline was polite but distant. Mom kept giving me concerned looks, as if I might be having some kind of breakdown. During dinner, Caroline mentioned that she and James were seeing a financial counselor. "We're learning to be more intentional about our spending," she said, not looking at me. taking responsibility for our own financial decisions. I nodded approvingly, but inside I felt something more complex than satisfaction. There was sadness there too, sadness that it had taken my withdrawal for my sister to discover her own capability. After dinner, Mom cornered me in Beth's kitchen. "I'm worried about you, Margaret. You seem different." "Different how?" "Less generous. Less like yourself." I dried my hands on the dish towel and turned to face her. "Mom, what if this is more like me than I've ever been?" "What do you mean?" "What if the person who said yes to everything wasn't the real me? What if she was just someone I created because I thought that's what family meant?" Mom frowned. "Family does mean helping each other. It means helping each other. Not one person helping everyone else while everyone else takes it for granted. No one takes you for granted. When was the last time Caroline helped me with something? You never asked for help. When was the last time anyone offered?" Mom was quiet for a moment. "You're so independent, dear. You've always been able to handle everything. What if I got tired of handling everything?" She looked at me with something that might have been recognition. "Are you tired, Margaret?" I felt tears prick my eyes, the first emotional crack in months of careful composure. "I've been tired for 20 years, Mom. I've been tired of being the solution to everyone else's problems. I've been tired of being valued for what I can do instead of who I am. I've been tired of feeling like I have to earn my place in this family by being useful." Mom reached out and touched my arm. "You don't have to earn your place. You're my daughter." "Then why does it feel like I'm only important when someone needs something?" The conversation was interrupted by Caroline's teenage son asking for help with his homework, and the moment passed. But something had shifted. Mom looked at me differently for the rest of the evening, less like the reliable daughter she could count on, more like the complicated human being I actually was. The change wasn't dramatic. There was no confrontation, no final break, no angry words that couldn't be taken back. Instead, there was a gradual recalibration of expectations. Caroline stopped calling me with her emergencies. When she needed help, she asked other people first: James's parents, her friends, her coworkers. Sometimes she figured things out herself. I watched from a distance as my sister learned skills I'd never given her the chance to develop: how to ask for help from multiple sources instead of relying on one person, how to plan ahead instead of creating last-minute crises, how to accept consequences instead of expecting someone else to absorb them. It wasn't easy for her. James finally got a steady job with benefits after their financial counselor made it clear that his photography hobby couldn't support their lifestyle. Caroline took on tutoring work to supplement her teaching income. They downsized their house, sold the boat James had bought during his brief contracting windfall, and learned to live within their means. They also learned to appreciate help when it came. When I offered to host Christmas dinner the following year, Caroline insisted on bringing half the food and arrived early to help with preparation. When I complimented the pie she'd made, she lit up with a pride I'd never seen before. "I've been practicing," she said. "I realize I never learned to cook properly because you always handled the big meals." "You're a good cook," I said, and meant it. "You just needed the chance to try." The most profound change was in how Mom related to me. Without the constant drama of Caroline's crises, she began to see me as someone who might have her own life, her own challenges, her own need for support. She started asking about my work, my friends, and my plans. She began to offer help in small ways, dropping off my dry cleaning when she was running errands, remembering to call when I had a big presentation, asking if I needed anything when she went to the grocery store. These were tiny gestures, but they felt revolutionary. For the first time in my adult life, I was being treated like someone who might need something instead of someone who existed to provide everything. The real test came the following spring, when I was diagnosed with breast cancer. The diagnosis was caught early during a routine mammogram, and the prognosis was excellent. But the treatment would require surgery, chemotherapy, and months of recovery. For the first time in decades, I would be the family member who needed help instead of the one providing it. I told Mom first, then Caroline. The conversations were awkward. We'd never developed the language for me to be vulnerable. But something remarkable happened. Caroline stepped up. She organized my medical appointments, drove me to chemotherapy sessions, and coordinated a meal train among my friends and colleagues. She cleaned my house, managed my medications, and sat with me during the long afternoons when I was too tired to do anything but rest. "I never realized how much you did for everyone," she said one day while helping me organize my pills. "Not just the big things, the little things too. The remembering, the planning, the just handling everything." "I didn't want anyone to have to worry," I said. "But that meant we never learned how to worry about you." It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had. During my recovery, I also discovered something unexpected. I had built a life rich enough to sustain me even when I couldn't sustain everyone else. The friends I'd made through work, the neighbors I'd gotten to know, the community I'd joined, they rallied around me in ways that surprised me. I hadn't realized how much I'd invested in relationships outside my family, or how much those relationships had invested in me. My assistant took over most of my work responsibilities. My business partner handled the client meetings I couldn't attend. My neighbor walked my dog and watered my plants. My book club brought meals and stayed for visits that were about me, not about what I could do for them. I realized that the Margaret who had emerged from decades of family servitude was someone worth caring about, someone who had cultivated genuine relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided utility. 6 months later, I was declared cancer-free. My hair had grown back curly and silver, and I decided to keep it that way. I looked different, and I felt different too, less careful, more direct, more comfortable taking up space. At the family gathering to celebrate my recovery, Caroline stood up to make a toast. "To Margaret," she said, raising her glass. "Who taught us that the best gift you can give someone isn't doing everything for them, it's believing they can do things for themselves." I looked around the table at my family, Mom, Caroline, James, their kids, various aunts and uncles and cousins, and saw something new in their faces. They were looking at me not as the reliable Margaret who would handle whatever they couldn't, but as Margaret who had survived something difficult and emerged stronger. For the first time in my life, I felt seen by them. Not for what I could do, but for who I was. That night, as I drove home to my quiet house, I thought about the journey from invisible to visible, from useful to valued, from indispensable servant to beloved family member. It hadn't required dramatic gestures or angry confrontations. It had required something much more difficult, the courage to stop doing what everyone expected and start being who I actually was. The woman who emerged from that process was someone I was proud to be. She had boundaries and needs and opinions. She offered help when she chose to, not when she was expected to. She was generous with her time and resources, but not endlessly so. She was loved not for what she provided, but for who she was. The art of becoming invisible, I realized, was really the art of making everyone else visible to themselves. When I stopped solving their problems, they learned to solve their own. When I stopped being their safety net, they learned to build their own. When I stopped being indispensable, they learned to be capable. And in teaching them to see themselves clearly, I finally learned to see myself clearly too. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for people who take you for granted is to stop letting them take you for granted. Sometimes the most generous thing you can do for people who don't appreciate you is to step back and let them learn what they've been missing. I thought about all the women who might be reading this, who might recognize themselves in my story. The daughters who always say yes, the sisters who always fix things, the family members who are valued for their usefulness rather than their humanity. Your worth isn't measured by your willingness to be invisible. Your value isn't determined by your ability to solve other people's problems. Your place in your family isn't contingent on your silence about your own needs. The art of becoming invisible taught me the most important lesson of my 51 years. The moment you stop being afraid of being seen as difficult, selfish, or unhelpful is the moment you start being seen as human. And being seen as human, it turns out, is the only visibility that matters. If Margaret's story resonates with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family or taken for granted by people you love, I want you to know that your experience matters. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story touched something in you, consider subscribing to join our community of women who are learning to step out of the shadows and into their own light. Sometimes the most powerful revolution is a quiet one, and it starts with a single word: no.